Thank you, everybody. You shouldn't have. Thank you. But I know everybody's really excited because today we're going to cover the struggles for ratification of what I think might be the most beautiful document ever put together, the United States Constitution. Now, today, you guys' objective is you will understand the opposing views of ratification, and what the essential question is, what were the opposing groups over the ratification process? And today, here we go. Struggle ratification. This was signed on September 17th, 1787, but it did not go into effect until June 21st of 1788. The reason being, you needed 9 out of the 13 states to ratify the Constitution. They had to send it off to their state legislators, and they had to pass it. Okay, so it was not so simple, though, because we had the Articles of Confederation, which we learned about earlier. So you had two groups that kind of formed out of this. You had the Federalists, who loved the Constitution. They loved a federalist form of government where you had shared powers between a strong federal government and the states. And then you had the Anti-Federalists, who opposed the Constitution because they feared that a tyrannical government could infringe on states' rights, much like they thought that England did and why the American Revolution was fought to begin with. So leaders of these groups, Thomas Jefferson became the leading anti-federalist, and kind of ironic, he also became the third president of the United States under a federalist government. And then the major leaders of the Federalists were Madison, Jay, and Hamilton. We'll learn about them later when we get to the Federalist Papers. Now, these two groups could arguably be considered the first two political groups in American history because they fought over a political fight to get this ratified. Now, they argued over a series of magazines, pamphlets, and newspapers until ultimately it was ratified on June 21st of 1788. Now, we need to look at the ideologies of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists to see, like, why are they so split over this wonderful document right here. All right, so Federalists, they believed you had to remove some power from the states because states could be corrupt and you need a strong national government to basically unify a nation. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, said, no, a strong federal government, that's what happened over with England and Parliament and why we had to fight the Revolution to begin with. Thus, they believed that state legislators knew their people best and could govern them best. Now, Federalists here favored dividing power amongst different branches of government. That basically acts as a check and balance, right? The federal government has a different series. They have the executive, the legislative, and judiciary that kind of share power in a way and check on each other. And the states would have basically the same, with their executive being the governor, and then they have their state legislators and their state courts. And they thought that this would be a wonderful balance to make sure that tyranny never came to be. The Federalists, on the other hand, wanted the legislative branch to have more power than the executive because they feared that that executive could be tyrannical like kings of the past. Okay? Now, Federalists also, they proposed that, they said, whoa. I understand that executive can become tyrannical, but you do need one leader. The buck needs to stop somewhere, but we will limit the power of that leader. And right, we already said that these guys, they thought that an executive can become a tyrant, a king in a sense. And these guys also believed that you did not need what the Anti-Federalists are arguing for, a Bill of Rights. Basically saying, a Bill of Rights is basically saying everything a government cannot do, right? The Constitution spells out the power of the government, but this Bill of Rights, which later became known as the amendment process, spells out just what the government cannot do. It limits the power of the government, and that's why the Anti-Federalists really fought for it and ultimately got it added to the Constitution. And that is what our government is built on, is compromise. These two compromise to get the type of government we need today. Not always seeing that right now in the real world. Okay, so just a little bit more about the Anti-Federalists. I said they were led by Thomas Jefferson, and a lot of them this was rural people and people that were in the agricultural industry. Okay, they believed that the Federalists basically created treason against the current government of the Articles of Confederation. Originally, Constitutional Convention, as we learned earlier in previous lectures, is that they were sent to fix the articles, not completely erase them. So they thought the Constitution itself was illegal and or treason. Okay? And the other stuff, they talked about the national government destroying states' rights, so on and so on. And they thought that executive could become a tyrannical monarchy, things we've already talked about. Now, the Federalists, on the other hand, thought that you needed a strong government to create a healthy, strong economy, maybe have a national currency. We saw a fight over national bank later on, we'll talk about that. And they thought it could protect individual rights, give everybody the same rights under this United States. Okay? They thought states could become tyrannical against people, which we are also going to see a little later as well. All right, and they took the name Federalist because the form of government that's created here in the Constitution is called federalism, which is, once again, shared power amongst the local and the federal governments, right? Local being states in this hand, right? And we already talked about Alexander Hamilton, James Madison. Another one was John Jay. George Washington really, when it finally came down to it, he was never a part of a political party. He's the only president in history of the United States to not have a political party, but his policies tend to be along the line of Federalist. Okay? And they wrote a series of papers called the Federalist Papers, which we'll talk about later as well. And here it is. We're going to go detail later. But the Federalist Paper, right, was just a series of, I believe, 89, could be wrong on that, but we'll check later. 89 series of essays that basically talked about the importance of ratifying the Constitution in New York. That's one thing people tend to forget. The Federalist Papers were written and published in the state of New York to try to get the New York state legislators to pass it. It later started circulating around the country, but at first it started just in New York, and it was to ratify the Constitution. They explained how the Constitution could be interpreted for future generations, all right, and also outlined kind of the setup. It's kind of like a summary paper of the Constitution, right? Kind of one of those, what people would call an idiot's guide to, or a frequently asked questions section. Okay? And, oh, I said 89, my bad. It was 85. Okay? All right. Now, Federalist Papers, it's just how they are broken down. Okay, 1 through 14 talk about the stress and importance of the Union. We're going to go into great detail on Federalist Paper number 10 in tomorrow's class. All right, 15 through 22 stress the inadequacies of the Articles of Confederation, something we've covered in earlier lectures. 23 through 36 explain the type of government that the Constitution has. So I'm trying to really make people understand that it's the type of government, how it's going to change and how it's going to be better for the people. And 37 through 51 explained what a republic was. They took that whole thing, no longer a direct democracy, but a republic. And then 52 through 83 explain the three branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and judiciary, and what they do and the limits on them. And 84 through 85 was a frequently asked questions section, right? They kind of like, what questions would people have? They wrote the question and gave the answers to it. Now, ultimately, this thing was passed because people had to compromise. And they compromised with basically saying, hey, look, anti-federalists, how about we pass all this and we promise we put an amendment process in the Constitution and we'll add the Bill of Rights. Originally it was 12 proposed amendments, 10 passed, and we'll go into detail on our next lecture. Okay? And with that compromise of the Bill of Rights being put, Delaware was the first to ratify on December 7, 1789, and New Hampshire became the ninth and decisive. And it finally went into effect in 1789. Okay? All right.